To a lot of non-Italians, this looks like a really strange pasta. Don't worry though, you don't have to be intimidated by Squid Ink Pasta. In today's video, I'm going to show you the perfect way to cook this pasta. Welcome to Actually Italian. I'm Sal. I've been living in Italy for years now. I'm really excited to teach you some authentic recipes so you can cook like an actual Italian yourself. Pasta made with squid ink is the ideal pasta for really any type of seafood pasta dish. The reason is because it adds like this other dimension, this other depth of flavor. It doesn't necessarily add a lot of seafood flavor because it doesn't taste very fishy. But what it does is it adds a richness, it adds this umami, a little bit of saltiness, and just creates another layer of flavor for the dish. It can be used really for any seafood pasta. Today I'm doing it with Frutti di Mare. So what is Frutti di Mare? It just basically means like the bounty of the sea, but generally it's a combination of different shellfish, so clams, mussels, shrimp, even in this case some calamari, stuff like that. There are two keys to make this an incredible seafood pasta dish. One is the freshness of the seafood. Then there's the preparation. I'm gonna make a nice seafood broth that's gonna be the base of the sauce. The first part of the broth we're gonna make with the clams. The type of clam that you use really depends on where you are and what you have access to. I have these little ones, and honestly, I wish that I had clams that were just a little bit bigger because they have more juice. We'd get more broth out of them. If you're in New England, for instance, you'd wanna find the smallest little necks that you could find. You wouldn't want big clams because they're gonna be tough. If you're landlocked, frozen clams work just as well. You can get them with the shell, without. The reason I'm doing this part of the broth separately and not just doing it all in the same pan is because there's a high chance of sand in these. I gave these a rinse before I put them in. Essentially what we want to do is take your clams and put them in a pot on about medium-high heat and then cover it up. The heat is going to cause them to open up and release their juices. We want to open this up and check every couple of minutes because as they open up, we don't want them to stay in there for too long. The longer the clams cook, the tougher they get. These are small, there wasn't much liquid in them. I had to add a little bit of water. You may or may not need to add water to this. It depends on the clams that you use. We'll take them out a little at a time as they open up and let the other ones release their water too. I'm going to separate these from the broth at the end of the cooking time and just set aside that broth. So that way all the sand is going to settle to the bottom and then I just use the broth that isn't sandy. When you're removing the clams from the broth, you want to look out for some of the shells that didn't open up. It means it's a dead clam and you need to throw it away. An optional step here too is to take the clams out of the shells, which I'm going to do because these clams are really small. It would be really hard to eat this pasta if I just kept them in the shells. Next up is we're going to make a broth with shrimp shells. This is why it's very important to get shrimp that has the shell on. If you can get them with the head and the shell, that's even better. I took the shell off and set them aside, and now we're going to make another little broth out of this. If you've seen my videos for the shrimp and artichoke pasta, you already know this step. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to link to that video below along with the seafood stew. Make sure to check those out if you haven't already seen them. I'm going to take a small pot with a little bit of olive oil and I'm going to put those shells in there to kind of toast. That's going to add another dimension of flavor. I'm also going to add some lemon zest to brighten it up a little bit. I just cover them with water and I let them simmer like that for maybe 5 minutes. Once it's been 5 minutes, I feel like I've extracted all the flavor that I'm going to get out of those shells. I'm just going to strain these right into the broth that I had for the clams. This is the base of our sauce now. Even while I'm making that broth, I can be starting the rest of the sauce. I have a saute pan with some olive oil cold. I'm going to add garlic and some chopped up bits of parsley stems. The reason I want this cold is because I want to extract as much flavor out of that slowly into the oil. Once the garlic is sizzling, I know we're there. We've extracted the flavor. At this point, I'm going to go right in with some half cherry tomatoes. If you're doing this in the middle of winter, you don't have fresh tomatoes, you could use passata. Once the tomatoes are starting to soften up a little bit, I'm going to use a little bit of tomato paste and I'm going to stir it in to the oil and toast it a little bit. Once you can smell like this little coppery kind of metallic aroma, then you know you're good. It only takes about 15 to 20 seconds. Then I'll add my white wine. The wine is going to add a nice acidity that's going to work great with the seafood. We need to let this cook down a little bit until it's almost a syrup. Once that happens, then it's time to add the broth now. Now just gently add that broth to the pan and make sure you're paying attention, because I wasn't and I almost dumped the whole thing in there, sand and all. At this point, we just want to reduce this. We're just going to let it cook down for probably 7, 8, maybe 10 minutes, depending on how much of the broth you actually have. In the meantime, I'm going to get the pasta going. So I'm going to get the water onto a boil. I'm going to use a little bit less salt in the water than I normally would. We're going to need to drain that pasta about 2 minutes before it would be al dente. Before that happens now, we want to check on our broth. I can see that it's reduced nicely. It's very concentrated. Once we have that broth reduced, we're going to add the shrimp, the calamari, and if you've shelled the clams, we're going to add that now too. The key to calamari is it should be cooked for 30 seconds or 30 minutes. So we really only need to cook this for less than a minute with the shrimp and the calamari together. I'm also going to add some fresh parsley here because we want to add that brightness. At this point, I'm shutting the heat off. It's not cooked yet, but once we put all the pasta and everything in there, it's going to continue to cook, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't get overcooked. We're about 2 minutes away from the pasta being cooked, so I want to take some of that cooking liquid and add it to the pan. It's going to create a more sauce-like texture and consistency on the pasta. If you have some really good quality olive oil, you want to drizzle a little bit over it at this point. The nice fresh raw oil really adds a lot. I've drained the pasta, now it's going to go right into the pan with that sauce. We need to really toss everything and mix it together, get everything incorporated. This is where the sauce kind of comes together. I'm going to check for seasoning at this point too, and it's perfect. I don't need to add any salt. Once it's been cooking all together for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, check it for doneness. If it's al dente, you're ready to plate it up. There's a lot going on with this. The pasta, it tastes like it has a little brininess to it. It has like this kind of umami. It's rich and it's got like this deep flavor. It makes the perfect foundation for this seafood dish. The wine and the acid from the tomatoes really heightens up all the flavors. Even the parsley, I mean, you can taste everything in every bite. That little extra step of making that broth with the clams and with the shells of the shrimp, it makes all the difference. This is just an intense and concentrated flavor of the sea. Well, I hope you get a hold of some of this pasta and make this recipe, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. We'll see you in the next video.